So for the record, today is June 17th, 3 p.m. And we're here to talk about the edits to the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory that are currently draft and on public notice. We're hosting this meeting to solicit more public comments and to inform you on the purpose of the mapping and such. I'm going to share my screen. Do you see it there? Yes. Okay. Great. My name is Laura LaPierre. I'm the Wetlands Program Manager. I've been working on this mapping project for 9 years or so, throughout various areas of the state. Most of the state has had updated wetland mapping, and this is the last big wall-to-wall mapping update in the state. And once that's done, everything will be new from 2019 to present. With me today, Lauren Soper. Hello. You can introduce yourself.
I'm the district wetlands ecologist for Caledonia and Essex counties.
And over here's my boss.
Yeah, Kevin Burke. I'm with the Watershed Management Division. I'm the division director with DEC.
All right, so I have a 20-minute presentation. You just go over this stuff, and then I will open it up for comments and questions, starting with in the room. First off, just for some virtual housekeeping, to make sure I can see the chat too. No one's commenting that they can't hear me, so that's good. For those of you on Teams, there's a microphone button. There's a place for you to type in the chat to provide comments, and you can also raise your hand and to speak. But first, if you could hold your questions until I get through my presentation, then we can have more time for comments. But if you have any questions on what's up on the slide, if something I said didn't make sense, you can feel free to interject as well, because I want to make sure everything makes sense. So I'll be talking through which maps we're updating, where they're being updated in Vermont, why we're making these edits, and how to review the draft edits. We have a few different wetland maps, so I want to start with that. There is a national wetlands inventory called the NWI. It's managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have some really strict protocol for how the mapping is completed and added to the national map. All of the Vermont work that was done by our contractors has been adopted by the national inventory and is up on their website. The Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory started in 1990 and was essentially an adoption of the National Wetlands Inventory at first. And we've since made edits to that where we have field delineations and other information. This update is essentially taking the most recent national wetlands update and including those significant wetlands into the VSWI. This is our regulatory layer. So if there is a mapped wetland area and there is a wetland actually there on the ground, and that is considered a significant Class 2 wetland where you need permits to have any impacts unless the activity is an allowed use. It isn't the end-all be-all zoning map for where the wetlands are. It is simply an approximation of where your wetlands are, so that you have a better sense of generally where the wetlands are, and we can go out into the field, or a consultant can go out into the field to find where the actual boundaries are. The third layer of wetlands that we have is the wetlands advisory layer. It is not a jurisdictional layer. It is, not something that's public noticed. It is simply a nimble tool where we can add known wetland areas so that, it's easy for people to see updates. And that is probably going to be timed out over time as we're updating the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory. And you see in these three images on the screen, it's the same area in different mapping. So this update will make things a lot more similar to the National Wetlands Inventory because the VSWI is so old. So why we need the maps is for preliminary site assessments, watershed planning. You can use them for land appraisals, wildlife surveys, seeing if the area is potentially regulated and such, getting just a general idea of where your wetlands might be. These maps are not intended to be used to determine the absence of wetland on a parcel. I'll get into aerial interpretation a little bit later, but because these aren't from someone walking the land, they have limitations and they can be used for general presence, but can't be really used to rule out that there are no wetlands. It can't be used to determine if you need a permit or not. If your activity is outside of the mapped area, it may still be within an actual wetland that's on the ground. So that's one way that we don't want to be using the maps. So the statewide update really started with the Missisquoi, the yellow area here. That was updated in 2023. And then in 2025, we added the Winooski and Otter Creek, the green areas. Most recently, this spring, we added all of the blue, all of the Connecticut River Basin and Northern Lake Champlain, which was like over 40% of the state. And now we're here with these red areas that are being put on notice right now and can be evaluated. I want to stress that like this isn't the last time you can comment on the mapping. We're always making edits to it based off of when we go out into the field and we see changes, or we just see that the maps weren't as accurate. So although like right now is a good time to look at the general larger map updates and comment by July 2nd, you can also like come back and say, oh gee, you know, I have a project, there's a mapped wetland, can you come out and check? We can certainly do that. With this update, it's a little different because we have the red areas, but we're also updating some places where people had gotten a permit and they had provided us with their delineations. So there are some areas outside of the red that have like one wetland that's just been added or subtracted. There are some deletions as well. So here's another image of the areas that are being updated. And a big reason why we're making this update is people really like having maps. It's understandable. It gives you more information on where these resources are on the landscape. But it's quite outdated. You see before we did this update, most of Washington County was last updated in the 1970s for the National Wetland Assessment. So we have much better technology. You see the image there, someone is actually drawing on some Mylar sheets where they're seeing wetlands, and then that was later digitized. So there's some issues with going from paper to digital that mess with the accuracy of the mapping, and of course, just having coarser aerial imagery makes it harder to detect wetland areas, especially forested wetlands. So here's just some examples of like aerial imagery where we can see wetlands, because someone last night was asking about that. So here you can really see like inundation, and an abrupt change in the vegetation. So you can really see that if someone was drawing this, they'd draw the line right along here. In this image, you can see lots of water staining, an area that's being flooded during the growing season. So like this might be mapped as wetland as well. And then here, you know, where there's fields, but in between areas aren't mowed, aren't used for agriculture, that's often a sign that those areas maybe are too wet to farm. So those are the sorts of things that our contractors were looking at when they're making this mapping. Because this is a national standard, they were needing to be zoomed out to a 1 to 8,000 scale, which means every square inch on their screen was 27 acres. So that's a big reason why we can use this for approximations, but still need to have delineations on the ground. We also, besides these aerial images, use elevational data too, where you might be able to see that there's a clear topography where the end of the slope and then it's flat, and that's often wetland in Vermont. So the updates made some really basic corrections. Maybe the Mylar shifted when they updated it and the wetland was shown on the house when the wetland was really to the side of the house. So those shifts have happened. The boundaries are more refined, they're more detailed. There are areas that are additions, and there's also areas of subtractions where it had been identified as wetland, but it wasn't actually wetland. I really want to stress though that any area that is newly mapped isn't creating newly regulated areas. So since 2010, if you have a significant wetland on the landscape, whether it's mapped or not, it is a protected, regulated area. So this mapping is providing more notice for landowners and the public to know where those wetlands are before they do construction, so we can work through the permitting process more easily with just people knowing about where wetlands are sooner. Okay, so the best way to review the maps is to go onto our website. So I want to give you a little tutorial in how to use this website. There's some instructions here, and you can see right up top, it says find address or place. You can type in the address that you're interested in, and it can zoom into that area for you. And you can see these teal areas and these black outlined areas. So the proposed mapping is everything that is teal. Those are all class 2 wetlands. The class 1 wetlands, that mapping isn't changing, but they're depicted on here in orange. There are very few of those, so you probably won't be seeing those in the areas that you're looking at. The black outline here is what's currently on the mapping and is proposed for removal unless there's teal area within it. So this polygon right here is shown as partially wetland, partially not wetland, which is a really good thing because this area that was identified as wetland is Vernon Street, and that's not wetland. We want that to be removed. These other 2 wetland areas weren't identified as wetland at all before. So what you can do is once you see a wetland, if you want to make a comment about that blue area, you can click on it. And you can see information about like who drew it, any notes, information about the hydrology, that it was drawn by a university or college, because our contractors were St. Mary's University that worked on that. You can click on this report or comment. I went back up for a second. When you click on a wetland or you go to an address, this tool will only show the wetlands that are within the focus area. So if you zoom out, all of the other wetlands are going to be disappeared. So what you need to do is click on this clear search location. And so when you zoom out, you can see all those other wetlands as well. It's just a quirk of the program that we're using. But to comment, you click on the wetland, hit report or comment. You can give your email address, name, and comments, and there's a place for you also to place an attachment. So if you have more information about the wetland or like photos of there being cactuses in those areas and that it shouldn't be wetland, like show us that. That's great information. This will be up until the end of the day on July 2nd, and we'll compile all of those comments. And we'll have our GIS, our mapping expert go in and make changes based off of comments. There might be some instances where we need to go out to the site to really understand if there is or isn't wetland there. So we might need to just do some additional follow-up in those instances. You can also give comments through the environmental notice bulletin, which is on the information about that is on the notice sheet in the back of this room, and Lauren can put it in the chat as well. You can add comments, but it's a little harder to know, like if you have a location specific, it's a little bit easier to be using that tool. If you know of a wetland that isn't included on the mapping, this interactive tool won't work for that. You need to provide a comment through the environmental notice bulletin, because you can only click on a existing blue area to make the comment. So if there isn't anything, we won't be able to get the location from that. So with that, I'll just go through the various watersheds. So this update went through different watershed basins. So we didn't do this by town, we did it by basin. This is the Memphremagog, Quaticook and Tontobia River watershed area that drains to the north. We did a lot of field assessments. We were only going on property where we received permission or was public access. In some instances, we were doing this review from the road as well, where you could see if there was cattails or not. In this particular watershed, we looked at 110 separate locations, and we sent that feedback to our contractors who actually, they drove around in many of these areas as well. They flew out and spent a day or so in Vermont to get familiar, because we have our own state experts who were able to provide them with more feedback on where it's wetland in Vermont. They've done work in almost every state in the nation, so they're really good, but they've never been to Vermont before. This area saw an 111% increase in detected wetland area. Again, like this part of the state, it was older mapping before. There's a lot of forested area, so it was a big change. And it's different from area to area. For example, Newport Town had a 200% increase, from 117 acres to 426. And then Morgan had less than a 50% increase. The Lamoille Basin, where we are today, we also assessed 110 locations, and there's an 80% increase in identified wetland area. Morristown had an increase of 115% in identified wetland area. Again, that's wetlands that had already existed, and now we're able to detect them on the maps. Johnson had about a 50% increase. The next watershed, Southern Lake Champlain, we assessed 96 locations, and there was a much smaller increase in identified wetland area. This was last updated more in like the early 2000s, so that there was less of a jump in technology for detecting wetlands. And then here in the far southern reaches of the state, we assessed 37 locations in the field, and there was a 21% increase in wetland area overall. In all of these towns, there was also wetlands subtracted. There was like some added, some subtracted. Like I think, for example, like the town of Morgan had like 2 acres removed. So that it went either way. And that's what I have for a presentation, so we can open it up for comments. And I just have a reminder up here on the screen that we can take the comments on this larger bulk update through July 2nd, and certainly we'll continue to work to improve the wetland mapping as well. Okay. So I want to start with within the room. If anyone in the room has a comment or question that you'd like to provide, you can raise your hand and we can start the discussion. If not, we can skip over to people who might be writing in the chat, but because you guys came here, I want you to have the opportunity first.
I have a concern.
Okay.
Okay.
And if you could just state your
I'm
name.
Deanna Judkins. I live in Hyde Park. We live on the edge of a wetland. We have 350 acres of land, and coming from Mud Pond down through the brook, which should be a brook, but because of the beavers, it's not a brook anymore. So that increases the map of wetlands, I'm assuming. So our sugar house sits on the edge of that. So does that mean we cannot increase the usage of our sugar house? Because we're going from currently 5,500 taps to probably 10,000, maybe 12,000. I don't know how to proceed with that, with knowing we're on the edge of a wetland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the area that's jurisdictional is where it's actually wetlands, and beavers can make an area of wetland increase. If you have a good topographical break where you have to fill a lot of area, then maybe it wouldn't change a lot. But you do have flat area where it could be increasing. So like when you have your construction project, it's the time of construction that we're looking at the wetland area. So
So if we put beaver baffles in now and look at construction in 5 years, we might have less wetland.
it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's the problem. It's the beavers. Because it just was a brook. My father-in-law hayed the field. He bought the land in 48 and it's been hayed consistently since 1948. But as the beavers keep flooding it back, it keeps coming into the hay field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so some other important points to what you're saying is hay fields, areas growing food and crop are exempt from the wetland rules. So if you're still going to be haying an area that's identified as wetland, that's totally fine. If it's going from hay to pasture, that's totally fine. If it's going from hay to a road, then that area is no longer growing food and crop, and you might need a permit for that. Same with like the construction of a sugar house. I think that your sugar house was already within a wetland buffer, so we should definitely.
Part of it was in the buffer,
Yeah, so we can
Is the
definitely.
buffer gonna get bigger as well as the wetlands?
The-
Are your
The
regulations changing?
buffer stays at 50 feet,
Okay,
but if the wetland
Wetland,
boundary moves, then it bumps it
Right.
over.
right,
So we will wanna take a look at that, and we can definitely talk about what you're thinking about after the meeting, just to
okay.
deal with those individual concerns.
Was it expensive to put main line and line in for another 5,000-6,000 taps? You can't increase the size of the sugar house.
Yeah, totally. And our permitting program is intended to marry project purpose with wetland protection. So we try to meet in the middle where if the project is within buffer zone, but there's no undue adverse impact to wetland functions and values, then it's something that we can issue a permit for. It might not be the exact configuration as you want,
Right.
but like, cause you've gone through the permit process before, but,
Okay,
Yeah.
well, it just was concerning because, like I said, if it wasn't the beavers, the wetlands wouldn't be getting bigger. But it is what it is.
okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments in the room? We can jump back and forth as well. If folks in the room aren't ready to give a comment or don't have a comment, that's fine as well. There's also the opportunity to provide comments later if you're shy or aren't thinking of anything right now, but we have someone with. Hi.
Hi, I'm Kevin Petrocco. I live right here in Morrisville. So in the areas where acreage is not being added into the wetland, but it's being removed, are those typically done only aerially or are those boots on the ground? And follow-up question to that is if it's acreage that's been removed, what's the likelihood that someone going in to do a delineation after is now going to find something that was kind of.
Yeah, it's possible, so, the landscape changes over time, so between now and 1970, when it was previously mapped, it might have become so heavily forested that you can't distinguish between the upland and the wetland area, and so it was removed from being wetland, so it's like always best practice if you're doing a construction project, you're clearing an acre of land, if you're clearing less than an acre of land, putting in a foundation and such to get a delineation from a wetland scientist or contact our office to get a desktop review or more information. So it's possible, it's always an approximation, the mapping, and we're just trying to make a better effort of having it be much better mapping than it was before. You wanna read the chat?
Yes, okay, we'll start with Fletcher Clerk. Delineations are a financial burden on our residents and landowners. Are there funds to help support them with a delineation?
We do not have funds for getting delineations for individuals. There might be other programs out there outside of our program. For example, there's the Healthy Homes Project where folks can apply to have their septic or well replaced and get funds for delineations. Or if you have like a restoration project, water quality project, there might be funding available. The best that we can do is you can submit a request for us to do a desktop review or potentially even go into the field if we have the capacity and provide more information. And if you're able to stay out of the area where there's wetlands, then you don't need to have a delineation done. So really the when the rubber hits the road, you need to have a delineation for a permit. And if you're able to avoid that permit, you can avoid that cost of having a delineation done. So we can definitely work with individuals to help with the financial constraints.
Okay. From Addison Kasmerick, might have mispronounced that. How much % of the advisory wetlands were reclassified as class 2 wetlands? Will the advisory wetland layer still exist in this project area?
The advisory wetlands were not wholesale adopted into the National Wetlands Inventory. That's now being moved to the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory because they weren't using the US Fish and Wildlife standards when that mapping was created. It was used by our contractors just as to get a general sense of where there might be wetland, but they still drew it to the National Wetlands Inventory standards. The advisory layer still exists within this project area, and I believe at the beginning I mentioned that we are looking into whether we can phase out the advisory layer because this wholesale mapping update to the Vermont Significant Wetlands Inventory is providing a much better mapping product.
And then there was a second question from Addison. Are the numbers provided, e.g. 111% increase, net increases, including any reductions in wetland areas?
Yes, that's a net increase.
Okay. And then, a third from Addison. Were the increases mostly in on forested lands or also in active agricultural area?
It's in both areas.
Okay, and then a second question from Fletcher Clerk. Another question about running power underground that might be in the buffer of a class 2. Do people need a delineation? Can they get a permit without a delineation?
If your project can qualify for one of the general permits, then you, by having like lesser impacts, then you might be able to have a less formal delineation, but a lot of times if you're looking at impacts to wetlands, you'll need a delineation to include within the application. Yeah, and if you're proposing to impact the buffer zone, I guess I'd wonder if you're only within the buffer zone, if you can move 25 feet over, maybe you can just avoid a wetland permit, and we can certainly work with you on your particular circumstance.
Okay, from Kevin Anderson. Hi, Kevin. Can you repeat what you said about the mapping scale 1 to 8,000 and what that means for the draft maps? Does that mean the St. Mary's team did not zoom in closer than that scale when drawing the maps?
They did zoom in closer, but they were required by US Fish and Wildlife Service to be identifying all areas that they could see to 1 to 8,000 to include those on the mapping. So the quality control work by the Fish and Wildlife staff was they were out at that scale, and if they saw areas that were wetland that weren't mapped, they were contacting them and asking for changes and updates. Thanks, Kevin. They did definitely zoom in closer. We were really encouraging them to map things that were smaller than the standard. They were generally mapping areas that were wetland at about, half an acre in size, but they were able to look at quarter acre wetland areas as well.
Okay, from Jason Gagnon. And some of the new delineation are old ditches. Am I still able to maintain them?
Yep, so we have an allowed use if you have an existing structure or facility that you just want to maintain. You can go ahead and do that with ditches. We'd want you to do that work within the existing footprint, so no wider and no deeper than what it was before.
From Fletcher Clerk, do we speak with you, Laura, or Crystal about a less formal delineation?
In Fletcher, that would be Crystal. And we have, an inquiry form that you can fill out online that will put you in our queue for, having a specific parcel review. And, you can add that into the chat when you have a moment, Sharon.
There are two different forms. There's a form for an existing wetland project that has a number, and then there's a new inquiry form for if the parcel that you're inquiring about doesn't have a wetland project number. So I'll put both
Okay,
into the chat.
great.
I have another question.
All right.
When this new wetland map comes in and it's delineated as to what is actually class 2 wetlands, can there come a point when us as house or property owners can stop paying taxes on that property because we have no say in any of it?
That would be a good question for the tax department or your town.
Would that come from the state though? Shouldn't the state regulate that, saying if it's a class 2 wetlands and it's on our map, it should not be taxed?
We've provided letters for individuals to take to the towns that say most of this most of this parcel is wetland, it's, not developable.
Right.
And, I think some folks have been able to get a lower tax.
Yeah, you get a lower tax, but it's not exempt. I'm a lister in Hyde Park. The lowest that will go is 0.2.
Okay,
We can't exempt it. That's a state.
okay, yeah,
So I think it should come from state level down to us as listers.
Mhm.
That if it's scheduled wetlands, we should tax people for it.
yeah, thank you for your comment. Like, I don't have control of that, but that is definitely a concern that we hear from time to time. And I suppose like having the better wetland mapping, more people might be able to contact you about that, tax decrease, perhaps.
I mean, it's unfair. I mean, unusable property.
Right, yeah, as we gain wetlands, we still pay taxes on that.
Yeah, I mean, if it came from this
Right,
group
right.
to the legislature and says,
Right,
you know,
like to
this is
see it.
unusable, they have no control
If
over
it
it.
could come from the state down to local
Right.
level, it would just make it easier.
Mhm.
For us as listers.
Yeah, definitely. Comment in the back?
I guess one counterpoint, just to play devil's advocate, and I know you're looking at it from the perspective of development, and, you know, certainly it very well could and should have a reduced value, but there's value in all the little things that live there, and there's value in hearing the beavers at night, and there's value in, there is still aesthetic value, enjoyment to.
Well, I'm not saying it's not valuable, why should I have to pay, you know, for my wetland? And everybody else is using it for birds and deer and, you know, and I don't have any control over it. That's what I feel, I'm not saying there isn't a value, but, we pay big taxes on wetland.
There is in the wetland rules, a list of activities that can occur within wetlands without a permit. So I can show you
But
where
not
that is.
farming, agriculture, I mean, that type of stuff you can.
if it's already in agriculture. But yeah, if you're converting more land to agriculture, that would need a permit. But I can, yeah, we can talk afterwards if you'd like, some of those options.
Guess I got one. You said earlier that, in buffer zones can be hay
Yeah, if
unless it's land is newly converted.
Yeah, so if you have a hayfield and there's a mapped class 2 wetland, and you're just continuing to hay it, you can go ahead and do that, like this. Those wetlands are exempt from the rules as long as they're growing food and crop. So you would only need to know if you need a permit, if you were going to construct some housing, some silos or manure pits and things like that.
Because I converted some land to field. And I had a delineation done, took 3 people over 8 hours to do it.
Hmm.
State employee comes on that land for 3 minutes, says, I don't rip it. That quick. And dug her heels in, and it cost us a lot of money. Said I could not pay any of that buffer without paying the state 25 cents a foot, square foot. And it seems to me that state employees need to not have that standoffish attitude. They should be working with us, the large landowners, and work with us instead of having that, because it is there. But some of them, it's that standoffish attitude, and it was with her. Dug her heels right in from the first minute she was there. And I had to have it done over again. Like, because she said she only believed one person. That was her words. That she would agree. And he came back there, the state wetland specialist came back there and looked it over again. He says, I believe our initial assessment. And he still didn't believe her. Even after he told her that. I ended up testifying down in front of the Senate Ag Committee and along with Deanna.
It was the same girl.
And I just don't think that attitude from state employees should be there. It's not great to work with landowners that way. And it just makes us defensive.
Yeah, it does. It makes it hard.
It's the way it is. I mean, we've owned our land, our family's had our land since 1872. And not this particular piece of land that I cleared. But still, we're the reason we have these large open areas, these large landowners like my family. That's the reason they're there. You know, we've been doing it without being told we need to do it a certain way. The land has become more forested because large landowners have made it that way over the past 120, 30 years. Because we were only 20% forest in Vermont. And we didn't get back to 80% by being dictated to by state rules and regulations. That happened because landowners let it happen and manage their lands to be that way. And it just, I just don't like that when state employees come and see me, and that's why I hate calling any of them to ask them anything. Because I'm gonna get that attitude. And that's just, I think that needs to be different from those employees, especially when it comes to wetlands.
And the other question I had, like on that buffer, that we couldn't hay it. But if we paid the state 25 cents a foot, we could hay it. Now, what's the difference? Either we're hurting it or we're not. Just looked like it's money, right? You know, as long as we paid you, yeah, we could pay it.
Well, the payment is an application fee for state staff to be hired to review permit applications. It is, our fee system is by the amount of impact because it costs more to review more impacts. But by like the value of that permitting is to ensure that there's no undue adverse impact to the functions and values of the wetland. So, in some cases, like if the activity happened before the permit was issued, you know, we're lucky when that's the case that there isn't restoration that needs to take place. But that's the value where, you know, this state mandate for wetland permits is if you have an activity in a class 2 wetland or the buffer zone, you need to get a permit for it. So that was able to put the site back into compliance, although on the landscape, you might not have seen any difference. Is there a comment in the chat?
It's a comment, not a question, from Addison Kazmarek. Note on taxation, if you are enrolled in current use, your use value rate is the lowest for wetland, non-productive land.
Thank you. Oh, good question from the Fletcher Town Clerk asking, is this being recorded? If so, where will it be available to watch it back? So this is being recorded. I'm going to use that recording to create a responsiveness summary in writing that will be posted with any official decision. And I've been uploading these presentations on YouTube, and everybody who's signed up with their email address will get an email with the link for that so that they can watch it again. You're also welcome to watch any of the other 5 or 6 presentations we already have on the YouTube channel for different parts of the state. Okay, any other comments or questions? If not, I can close the meeting and I can stick around for a little while for those of you in the room. Looks like someone's typing. Oh, they typed thank you. So not another comment.
Thank you.
All set. Okay, thank you. With that, I'll close the meeting.